There's been a lot of talk recently about reel mowers versus rotary mowers or regular just push mowers that you probably would see in a normal yard. And I received a lot of questions even the past week on how do I transition to reel mowing to a lower cut if I wanted to, or what's the reasoning on why I use a reel mower when I use it compared to a traditional mower. And so today I thought, what better way to explain all that than to do a video about it and show you kind of the differences between the machines, what they do, why they do it, and then some of the pros and cons to each one and why you may want to do one over the other. All right, so you saw me go down the middle of my yard here once with the Time Master. This is a rotary mower, just meaning that it has a blade on the bottom spinning around in a rotary fashion, cutting off the grass tips, and that is one way that most people mow. Then when we're talking about a reel mower, I'm just using the old school version here, the manual push one. We've got a reel here. This is a set of blades that spin around, and here on the bottom we have a bed knife, which is just a flat piece of metal. So as the grass comes in this way and it meets up with this bed knife, it's sitting on top of there. As these are spinning around, they are just slightly touching that bed knife, and as it's spinning, it's coming around and cutting that grass off just like a scissors would. So we get a very clean cut from that. Let me show you a couple of samples. I pulled one from the side that I used with that red Time Master, and then one from the side that I used with this right next to it. So here's one that I pulled from the Time Master side, and honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the cut. Usually these rotary mowers struggle at lower heights because there's just such a dense grass there that it's trying to cut off. But this one here, I was cutting at 1 3/4 inches, and I just sharpened these blades. So honestly, the cut looks pretty good on this blade right here. Now let's move to the reel mower. You can see on this one that the cut is extremely clean. That's really because of that scissor-like action there. So you get the cleanest possible cut there with the reel mower. The other benefit to that reel mower is that we can cut much lower with it, much closer to the ground, and still get a clean cut. So many of you have seen a lot of us here on YouTube this year cutting our grass lower, or maybe over the past couple years. That really is the main ticket there to getting to a lower height, is having a reel mower. It's not to say that you can't do it with that rotary mower. Just last week I cut my front yard at 1 1/4 with my Honda, and it looked pretty good at that height, but I can't really go any lower than that. That is the lowest setting. And so if you're wanting to be even lower, which for most of this year I've been cutting my front yard at 3/4 of an inch, maybe even slightly lower yet this fall, then that's where this reel mower comes in again. So this part of my lawn right here is cut at 3/4 of an inch, and that is done with a powered reel mower. The reason that I can get such a clean, nice cut here on this at 3/4 of an inch is because of using that reel mower. The rollers, rolling everything over flat, and with everything cutting on that bed knife, you can get much, much lower and still get a very nice clean cut. So back here behind the fence we have some grass that's at least at 3.5 inches, maybe slightly more. It could be closer to 4 now. It's grown quite a bit. So what's the best case scenario in mowing this? From my experience, I found that the actual rotary mowers work much better on taller grass. And here in a second I will show you the manual on this stuff and show you kind of what happens with it. But if you have this tall grass like this, it's much easier for the mower with the rotary, with the suction that it creates with the blade growing around, to pull this up, cut it off cleanly, and it works much better in that way. Remember that a reel mower does not have any suction. You're just relying on those blades going around. It's harder in taller grass for it to pick anything up and cut it off. Let's do a small test on this tall grass. I'm going to set this to the highest mark, which should be 2 1/4, I think, something around there. Okay. First of all, I think this is maybe where those manual reel mowers get a bit of a bad name to themselves, is that people try to treat them like a traditional rotary and think that you can mow once a week, once every couple weeks or something, and then it becomes hard to push and they think, man, these things really suck. Well, honestly, if you'd mow much more often with it, then it's very easy to use, and if you're only cutting off a small amount of the grass blade, it's not hard to push at all. But so you can see this just sitting here. You can see how the grass blades come up through this. So if you think about them spinning around here, yes, it's cutting, but there's some of them coming up through these blades and it's missing those. There's nothing there to pull all of this up before it gets cut. It's just rolling over it. Whatever gets cut off, gets cut off. So then you'll see what happens is that much of this gets missed. So there's some of this cut right here. You can see it's cut. Some of it's missed. So if you're willing to go over it a few more times, then eventually you can get a pretty decent cut out of it. But that's what happens at the taller heights. So you've decided to go lower and you think just set the mower down pretty low, go over the grass, get your reel mower out, and it'll be time to reel mow. Well, it doesn't exactly work quite like that. So today I wanted to show you the example of what's going to happen when you do set this low. This is set at 2 inches, so it's not even extremely low, but you will notice how bad this looks because we are cutting down into the crown of the plant. So you will see over here on this side that we've got all of this stem here. We've got probably about 2 inches of stem, and then the leaves start coming out. So what happens is when we cut all this off, obviously this is what we're left with. The yellow, the brown, the gross stuff. So then you might think, okay, fine, I'll get out the reel mower, I will come in and I'll just cut all this down. We'll be left with just something at the bottom and it'll start to grow up from there. Well, let's try that. So what happened? Well, one, I had a very difficult time even cutting through that because of this thick matted mess, and two, it of course did not look any better, and it did not cut really any better than the rotary cutting low. So still what happens here is we're left with just the crowns of the plants, just the stems, and this thick, gross, kind of matted mess of grass that was here. So now you're thinking, oh no, I've ruined my lawn, what have I done to it? No, we've just scalped it. We've come in, cut off all of that green stuff, we're down to the stems, and it will recover. Of course you've stressed it some, that's definitely true, but it will come back. You don't need to worry, you haven't killed anything. So maybe some people got to this step and they didn't know what to do next, or they got too scared to move on to the next step. So from my experience, I just did this in my backyard. I had it at the exact same height that we were just looking at, and now it is down to 1.5 inches, slightly less than that maybe, and this is what it looks like. At this point here, you should be able to tell the difference in the thickness from that matted stuff to now where we have retrained the grass. So if we look in here, I'll try to pull out one of these blades. Now if we look here, you will see that the branches are starting to come out around probably less than 1 inch now, whereas before we had 2 inches of this sticking up before we would get to the leaves. Now the leaves of the grass are noticing that they need to start coming out lower because we are training it to be at that height. So whatever height you want it to be at, I found that first go maybe 1 notch lower than that. So if you want to mow at 1 inch, go to maybe slightly less than 1 inch, maybe even 3/4 of an inch. Do 1 mow there. It will kind of set the grass in place to say, whoa, that's pretty low, and then bring it up slightly and consistently mow at that next height. This will train it to start sending out leaves right at where you want it to be, and if you stay consistent, it will look fantastic. So what happened when I got to this stage before was I noticed that all of this matted grass just has to go. It cannot stay here. We're never going to be able to cut cleanly through it for a while. Maybe eventually it would kind of thin itself on its own and we would be able to cut it better, but I didn't really want to wait that long. So I used a dethatching tool on my Swardman reel mower, and that thing pulled out all of the dead grass, all of that thick matted stuff down at the bottom that we needed to get rid of to cut through it cleanly. So this is a step that I highly recommend if you want to speed up this process in getting to cutting lower faster. So you could go to a rental place, get a power rake, or maybe you can find someone that has a dethatching tool. I have an electric machine as well that I've used in the past. Whatever you can do to thin it out I went over my backyard in multiple directions, thinned it quite a bit. I showed this entire process in this video that I will link right here. So if you want to go reference what I did there, you can definitely go do that. But essentially, I went over it in multiple directions, got it so thinned out that I could cut it well with my rotary mower first, and then I started in with this manual reel mower. And over time here, this is about a month's time now since I did that, it's gotten better and better each day. So before you get yourself into this whole reel mowing deal, I want to mention just a few things that you need to think about. The first thing is that if you do end up trying it and you just can't stay consistent with mowing, or you don't end up liking it as much as you thought that you would, go ahead and go back up to the higher height. It will be totally fine. You haven't trained the grass for long enough that it's going to make any difference. And even if you had, you can just allow it to grow taller again, and the grass will adapt back to the way that it was doing it before. So don't think it's like an all-in thing that you can't go back on. The second thing is, when I talk about consistency, I mean consistency. You have to understand that reel mowing low grass is much different than taking care of a lawn, just mowing once a week and doing just a few things here or there. So let's go over some of those things you need to be aware of. Mowing consistency is extremely important. I'm mowing every other day on the reel cut turf that I'm doing out front there that was 3/4 of an inch. Sometimes every day, depending on the season, depending on how much it's growing, rain, weather, all of those things. So you have to be able to commit yourself to that part of it. So if you can't end up doing that, then it's going to get taller quite a bit. You're going to come in, cut it off, and it's never going to be able to adjust itself well to that height that you want to cut at. It's going to be consistently cutting off much more than 1/3 of the grass blade. You'll just never get the greatest looking turf that you could have if you were mowing consistently. I don't know how good it could look. Maybe it will still be fairly good if you were able to cut it maybe every 4 days. I don't know, because I haven't personally done that. I know that consistently keeping up with that mowing has been important to me, and it's created some amazing results. But be aware of the mowing as sort of the most important aspect of it. Beyond that, I've received some messages from people who say, I understand the mowing part of it, but what about the rest of it? Is there anything else that you're not really showing on videos that's much more difficult than maybe you make it out to be? So I don't know that there's anything I haven't really showed on videos this year, but what needs to happen more often is consistent fertilizer at smaller amounts, and some issues with some fungus, which we will talk about here in a second as well. So when I'm talking about frequent and light fertilizers, if you think about your normal way, maybe you do fertilizing now once or twice a year, maybe 3 or 4 times a year even, but they're in higher doses. It doesn't work quite as well for this style of grass, because again, you're wanting to stay consistent with the mowing, and so that it's only growing a little bit at a time, and it's not getting flushes of growth where all of a sudden in a day it's grown an inch. You don't want that to happen. So the consistent fertilizers at lighter doses works much better. You have to be out in the yard more often working on those things. Not a problem for me. Some people really don't have the time for that. So that's one thing to think of. The other thing that I ran into with this is that fungus pressure is much higher for me in my climate here. So it gets to 100 degrees where I am here in the summertime. That's stressful enough for any lawn, really, that's cool season around here. But sometimes during the evening time, I remember one specific moment this year where it was 83 degrees overnight, high humidity. All of those things create an environment for fungus that can really get out of control quickly if you don't really know what you're doing and you don't pay attention to what's going on. I had some issues with Pythium this year. Took over a few areas of my front yard during the warmest, humid times of the summer. The more I started looking at this, the more I understood that I need to learn much more about fungicides, how to rotate them. There's different issues if you just use the same ones over and over with resistance. All of that learning has come into play, and I'm still learning all of that stuff. I'm gonna try to come up with a better program for my ryegrass next year, so I avoid as many fungus problems as possible, but this also gets into big time money. Fungicides, many of them that are used on golf courses, things like that, are not cheap at all, and so you have to be prepared for that as well, or you have to be prepared that maybe you could have a fungus issue that takes over a lot of your yard. You may need to fix it when you get to a cooler point in the season. So honestly, I hope none of that sounded like a discouragement from doing this, because I don't personally think it should be at all if you are aware of what you need to do ahead of time, and if you are aware of what goes into it. But I don't think I've mentioned some of those things before, and so I think people have an idea that maybe you just mow the lawn every other day and it looks amazing, and that will get you quite a ways with this. It will. But there's other things that go into it too, And so I wanted to make sure you understand that part of it before you get into it. But I hope that's not a discouragement to any of you in any way, because I love the results from it. There's nothing better that I've ever done in my yard as far as the way that it looks than reel mowing. Nothing. There's never been a time when I've been more pleased than I am right now with the way things look. If there's any questions you have in there that I missed, please let me know down in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching this video. We'll see you next time.